Are you searching for your dream apartment? Well, do you actually know what it means to have a north-facing or west-facing apartment? The orientation of your apartment to the sun and the wind makes all the difference. In summer, some apartments actually get much hotter inside than it actually is outside. And in winter, the opposite can happen. So don't pick the wrong apartment. So in this video, I'm going to teach you how to pick the best apartment in terms of its orientation to the sun and the prevailing winds. But if you haven't watched my last video on how to plan your home around the sun, check out the link below and watch that first. I'll wait. No, I actually won't wait. So I'm going to use a few examples of various apartments in Sydney, and I'm going to talk you through my thought process. You should be able to apply these principles in most places around the world. You just need to understand how the sun moves and how the wind moves around your area. To find out where the prevailing winds in your area are, you can just ask Google or ChatGPT. But if you want to be a professional, you would check the wind roses. Find out where the wind comes from in summer and where the winds come from in winter, because they might be different. In Sydney, during the warmer months, most of the winds come from the northeast and also the south. And in winter, the winds also come from the south, but also the west as well. So based on this information, and if you already watched my last video, you can probably guess that north-facing apartments would be ideal for Sydney and most places in the southern hemisphere. But for those of you that are not convinced, let's have a look at a few apartments facing several other directions first. So in this first apartment, we have a south-facing apartment. How do I know that it's south? By looking at the north point. They might look different on every plan, but they're usually a circle with a mark on it indicating where north is. And from that, you can tell where south is and where east and west is. And if you still get east and west mixed up, check out the link below where I teach you a quick way on how to remember. Most south-facing apartments are usually very dark because they get very little direct sunlight. They definitely won't get any direct sunlight in winter, where you need it the most. They might only get some in the early morning in summer and also the late afternoon. You can see here when I visited this apartment, they had to turn the lights on during the daytime, which looked very different to the photos online. That's why you should always check the apartments in person. There's also a large tree and a tall building directly opposite. It's going to be very hard for sunlight to go in this apartment to warm it up. And you'll also get the southerly winds during the winter. Now let's look at an east-facing apartment. East-facing apartments will only get morning sun, which might be fine, but the rest of the day you'll be in shadow. But if you look at the photos of this apartment, you can see this apartment is on ground floor, and that there's a tall building across the road. This will block most of the morning sun, hence this apartment will be dark most of the time. I tend to avoid ground floor apartments because it's very hard to get direct sunlight and airflow, especially if it's in a dense urban environment. And look how tiny this furniture is, it's so fake. So that's why checking inside of your apartment is not enough. You also have to look at what's outside your apartment. The next apartment is a west-facing apartment. I would avoid west-facing apartments because they get all the afternoon sun during the hottest time of the day. You also get cold westerly winds during the winter mornings. This particular apartment doesn't even have any shading devices for its living room, which means it will take in all that afternoon sun and it will get very hot in your apartment and you have to waste a lot of money on your energy bills to cool your apartment. Okay, so at this point, you're probably ready to buy or rent a north-facing apartment. But wait, not all north-facing apartments are built the same. So this north-facing apartment is similar to the last one, where the living room has no external shading. The balcony does provide some shading to the bedroom, but it won't help shade the living room, which is where people spend the most time in. So again, this apartment will easily get very hot during summer. This apartment also promised a beautiful water view, but when I actually visited it in person, all I could see was a dirty concrete roof. The next apartment is a little bit better because the balcony is in front of the living room. This will shade it from the summer sun. There's also an opportunity for some cross ventilation, which is great. However, with these sort of layouts, you have to watch out when they get too long and narrow. The longer the plan is, the darker and harder it is to ventilate the middle areas. You have to rely on artificial lighting and mechanical ventilation for these areas. Okay, so now let's look at a good example of a north-facing apartment. I personally look for a north-east facing apartment if I were to live in Sydney. That's because you won't get much of that hot afternoon sun from the west, and you will also have access to the northeasterly breeze during summer. I like that this particular apartment has balconies on both sides, which helps shade the apartment from the high summer sun. I've personally visited these apartments, and I can confirm that it's as light as an area as the pictures claim to be. And on the other side of the apartment, there's a northwest facing apartment. It's basically a mirror image of the previous apartment I just showed you, and it's not too bad. Usually I would worry about the hot summer sun and cold westerly winds. But this particular apartment has vertical shading devices that can slide along the balcony wall to block out the low summer sun when we need it. There's also another tall building on the west to help block out the westerly sun and cold westerly winds. Again, that's why it's always important to look outside of the apartment. Now, I've only addressed the issue of apartment orientation. There are other factors that you need to consider, such as room sizes, finishes, and building workmanship. If you'd like me to talk about those other factors, drop a comment below and subscribe. And if you still haven't watched my last videos on sun and ventilation, check them out now, and this time I won't wait.